this um, as we finish. I'll be emailing that to you in the next day or so. So welcome everyone to our last in our spring series of Zoom seminars presented by Living Without Lust. We are a nonprofit that helps men who struggle with lust and supports the Christian leaders who serve them. So we have a kind of a dual focus. One is to help individual men in recovery, and also to help Christian leaders to be able to present the gospel in such a way that it speaks to the sexual brokenness and addiction of our time. So as people continue to join us, let's open with prayer, and then I'll introduce our guests. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time to step aside for a moment in a busy day to learn, to grow, to have a deeper understanding brought to us about what is out there for us to take advantage of, and also to those who are around us in our families and our churches, our friends, that they might also take advantage of. And we thank you for this time, and we ask you to bless it to our use. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, again, thanks for joining us. We're joined by two guests, by Matt Wenger and Ed Tilton, both of Boulder Recovery, and also associated with the Begin Again Institute. I'm just going to read the Begin Again Institute, and Ed is the Chief Operating Officer of the Begin Again Institute. And Matt, maybe Matt, you can give us your title when you talk. But at the Begin Again Institute, we provide heart-centered, trauma-focused, and neurobiology-based treatment for individuals struggling with intimacy disorders and sexual addiction. Our counselors and therapists use a combination of somatic, experiential, and evidence-based therapies available to treat the root cause of addiction and behavior. And just to give some context to this, we at Living Without Lust often talk about the 4 pillars of recovery. So if you don't know what to do, if you're in the very beginning or you're stuck, there are 4 things that we encourage everyone to do. And we're going to talk a lot about the first one of those today. The first is to go away to some kind of a short-term gathering. You call it a workshop, you can call it rehab, whatever it is. Those things last normally from a long weekend to a couple of weeks. Longer term inpatient treatment centers can be a month or more, but we deal with the shorter term ones mostly. Then when you come back, we encourage you to go to a therapist who understands sexual addiction, trauma, who has a Christian perspective that you feel comfortable with. The third thing we suggest is that you get into a 12-step program, because every therapist is going to say you have to have a maintenance program, a way you work this program on a daily basis. And so we encourage you to do that. And the final thing is to have some kind of a mentor. Often this crisis is accompanied by marital separation, divorce, sometimes job problems, and all kinds of emotional, spiritual, and psychological issues. So sometimes we need somebody to just come alongside us and to believe for us, to pray with us, to walk with us as we walk through this new reality that we're dealing with post-disclosure. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ed. I've introduced him essentially as the COO of the Begin Again Institute, and he's going to tell us the difference, or the alignment between the Begin Again Institute and Boulder Recovery, which I'm even not sure. So I'll let them take over and make their presentation. Thank you guys for being here, both Ed and Matt.
Yeah, well, Jay, that was such a great job at explaining so much of what we're trying to help men, get that traction in their recovery with. So thank you for that introduction. So with Begin Again Institute, we've been around since 2008, and ultimately, because of what Jay had talked about in terms of the various lengths that people go away for treatment, we wanted to be able to create something that was unique and was special in helping men get the traction that they need in their lives. And so a big piece of that started with, hang on one moment, Sydney. Yes. That's my daughter. So a big a big piece of that was it's very difficult for men to go away for 45 days or for a number of weeks, and so we created a 2-week model that's a closed group model or a cohort model to really help men develop a new sense of intimacy, vulnerability, and trust with their authenticity. And so during that 2-week model, our base platform is something called TINSA, or trauma-induced sexual addiction, which really helps the men understand early childhood wounding and old past emotional wounds that have changed and shaped the way in which we understand our relationships and how we engage the world, and how the world accepts us. As a result of being able to identify these traumas, we have a number of different modalities that we work with to really help the men resolve their trauma and be able to work towards a place of not having a trauma response to particular things, but just having that live as a memory. And so we utilize brain spotting, we utilize internal family systems, we utilize genograms, and intergenerational trauma, and conversations around, even epigenetics, in terms of what are things that were happening in your family's life that may have shaped the way in which some of the genes were passed down to you. And one of the things that was unique for us is that we started to notice, on average, we would have about 10 guys that would come through each cohort model. And of those 10 guys, about half of the guys were strong, devout Christians. And they were guys who were really, this was the one area of their life that they had unmanageability. That they were doing a really great job in terms of showing up at church and being great leaders and the best fathers that they could be. But this was the one spot where they were really struggling. And in addition to that, Begin Again Institute is not Christian specific. It's I would say it's kind of an all paths approach. But we were actually starting to see about one guy each intensive having a very spiritual experience. Guys were coming up to us and saying, I prayed for the first time in many years. And so as we started to kind of look around our leadership team, we started to notice there was a trend in terms of, we had a lot of Christian men that were on our leadership, and what would it look like to build a program to really help Christian men. So really kind of the idea of building a community to heal our community. And myself, I'm a Christian. Matt's going to be able to talk about his background, and we were really fortunate to be able to bring the entire team down to San Antonio to meet with Jay, and just to really get to know each other very well. But I'll let Matt kind of talk a little bit about Boulder Recovery and when we set the intentionality for our gospel-centered program, what that looked like.
So yeah, I'm Matt, and I'm the clinical director for Begin Again Institute and for Boulder Recovery. And like Ed said, when we began formulating this idea of like, what would it look like to build a program on the foundation of Begin Again Institute and the Tinsel Model, but also incorporating the truth of the gospel and also the pieces of the Christian male identity that are specifically wounded by this addiction. When we started to do that, certain things that were coming to the surface, the way in which trauma affects our spirituality, the way that trauma affects our view of God, and what do Christian men need in their treatment that's different than the man that's not coming in from that spiritual background or are not saved, and not really interested in looking at this addiction through that lens. So out of these conversations came Boulder Recovery, and it took us about a year to collect some data and to build the curriculum and collect the staff that we needed to run an effective program. But we're confident that the trauma-based model works for Christian men because we've seen it over and over and over and over again. But what we're really excited about is being one of the only places that I know of that is integrating the gospel and strong clinical work into a single program over that 2-week period, where guys don't have to quit their job, they don't have to totally disrupt their life, and it's not as cost prohibitive as these longer term programs. So that was kind of the mission behind Boulder. How can we still do strong clinical work and also bring in the truths of the gospel that are transformative for people's lives? And then also, how do we reach Christian men that are not going to show up at a therapist's office? Begin Again Institute has a strong outreach to clinical providers. They're like, hey, I got this guy in my office. He's stuck. He keeps relapsing. I want to send him to you guys to get a jump start on this. We got a strong bond with the clinical community, but there are all sorts of Christian men that are never going to show up in a therapist's office, that may go to see their pastor, that may talk about it in their accountability group, but they don't know that places like this exist, and maybe they'd be uneasy going to them. So building relationships with churches and church leaders, parachurch ministries, where we can get this healing work to people that aren't going to seek it out through the clinical avenues. So really excited about it. Yeah. And so if we want to kind of go to the next slide, we can talk. We've already kind of mentioned some of this. So we're using the Tinsel Model, so developed by Dr. Barta, who trained me in sex addiction work and how that integrates with the neurobiological lens. So we've been doing that at Begin Again Institute with great success. We see incredible transformation in the guys, both Christian and non-Christian men, through that program. And we're excited to continue to use that model and to bring the way that God's created your nervous system and your brain to Christian men that are maybe freaked out about how science and mental health interacts with their spirituality. But it's not a surprise to God. He made us. He made our brains. He made our nervous system. How we respond to threats in our environments. He understood that. He designed that, right? So this should not be in conflict or antithetical to the Christian worldview. And so I'm really excited to be able to bring that together for guys and say, hey, you don't have to turn your Christianity off to get mental health treatment around addiction. These are actually coming together in really beautiful ways. So like I said, we're combining research around neurobiology, addiction, the nervous system, and trauma, and how those all have woven together to create this idea of a dysregulated nervous system that was trained to be dysregulated from a really young age by that trauma, and how sex addiction has arisen in the lives of these men to regulate that dysregulated nervous system. It's not a moral deficiency. It's not a character issue necessarily, although the behaviors that they're involved in are sin. It's not a rejection or rebellion against God. It is a neurobiological addiction. And while the behaviors are sin, addiction is not a sin. It's a chemical reaction within the brain. We want to bring that non-shaming approach to Christian men and saying, God has so much compassion for you in this struggle. He's not standing there tapping his foot waiting for you to get it together. He has compassion for you, and there's some sort of meaning for you in God walking you through this recovery rather than just removing it from you. There is some grace, there is some goal, there is some intervention from God that is going to happen in your life, some renewal and change and a closeness in your relationship with God that's going to result from this that is better for you than just having God pluck addiction out of your soul. You know, I say this sometimes to people. I don't think God is primarily interested in lowering the amount of sin in the world. He's interested in bringing glory to himself and creating more connection and closeness with him and with his people. And sometimes walking through the darkness of addiction is a way in which we can not just come into closer contact with people in our lives through recovery, but also come into closer contact with God. So Christian men are at a crossroads with this addiction. You know, you see the slide here, this fractured self. There's this way in which Christians function in their world to try to manage their life, to try to project someone that has it together, that is maybe very passionate about integrity and purity, these kind of religious smoke screens. And I say religious like Pharisaical smoke screens that come up to protect men and so they can hide behind these smoke screens, so they don't have to get vulnerable. They don't have to be authentic. They don't have to show weakness around what they're really struggling with in their day-to-day lives. So they have all these external management systems that usually involve performing and control and hiding behaviors, but they're still not receiving that internal transformation. And they know what God has for them. They know what the gospel offers to them. They know what Jesus offers to them in that truth, but they don't really believe it for themselves. And so the Christian men that we've seen through the program have theological beliefs that they believe are very true, but they have functional beliefs that are in conflict with that. So you'd say, you know, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, but he doesn't really love me. You know, salvation is through faith alone, but I have to earn it because I'm not good enough, right? So they have these conflicting theological beliefs and functional beliefs that are causing this internal dysregulation and friction within their identity as someone who's created by God and created to know him and believes all these things up here, but is not experiencing the truth of the gospel and not experiencing the love of God. I was just talking with a guy yesterday who we were walking through a traumatic experience for him, and he was in the middle of a guided meditation in relationship to relationship to Jesus, and he met Jesus on the road, and he said, you know, I am so sorry, Jesus, that I have squandered the grace of God in my life and pursued this addiction. And when we kind of came back and were processing it, like, do you realize that you used the line from the prodigal son that the father, I have squandered your inheritance? And he's like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Like, do you really think that's how like God looks at you as this? No, he said, he interrupted that guy. He said, bring a robe, give him the ring, put some shoes on his feet. We're going to go have a party. God is not standing there tapping his foot, and he longs to see transformation and wholeness around this issue. But this brokenness and this fracture is really about childhood wounding and the projections that guys that have suffered from this trauma are putting onto God. So we see this a lot where if guys were abused physically or emotionally or psychologically, they tend to see God as someone who's out to get them, someone who's out to undercut their happiness, who's disappointed in them, who's looking to punish them or to teach them moral lessons rather than draw them into a deeper relationship with him based on grace and forgiveness that he offers at the cross, right? So they have this kind of saboteur, right? And they don't want to get close to God because he's going to mess up and he's scary and he's going to ruin my life. And the more intimacy I get with God, the more dangerous he becomes because he's going to undercut my life. And right. Or if they were neglected or there's emotional vacancy in their home, they tend to see God as with his back turned to them, and they have to perform and do this dog and pony show or rain dance to get God to turn around and respond to them and be kind and warm to them. So these early childhood woundings have an effect on our nervous system. They have an effect on the way we think about the world. and they have the effect on our spiritual lives and the way that we interact with God and the way that we understand his character. And the third point here is that the nervous system is kind of at the root of all this stuff, right? The way that I respond to threats in my environment and even threats to myself spiritually. So this is why that trauma model is really, really at the core, because we're going to teach them about their trauma. We're going to teach them about their spiritual wounds, and then we're going to teach them how to regulate their nervous system so that they can begin to feel all of their feelings, not just their preferred feelings. We're going to teach them how to sit with difficult emotions rather than try to change those emotions through external sources, either addiction or television or whatever else. And then we're going to teach them about how they're not a black sheep, that this stuff has been going on in their family for probably a long time, and it's been affecting their parents and their parents' parents, and they can now be a part of generational change for their children and their families.
And so for our men, you know, who are these guys? And, you know, for this presentation, I think we all know, you know, the guys that are struggling with this. But part of the goal of Boulder Recovery is to really be able to bring hope and healing and reduce the shame that so many of the guys are living with in silence, you know. And so these are guys that acknowledge that their efforts alone have not been enough. These could be guys that have gone to a workshop before or a men's retreat before, or this could also be somebody who is ready to get honest and accept a great deal of help. This is somebody, because we are just a 2-week program, that, you know, there can't be any co-occurring issues with alcoholism or other drug addiction, because we don't have the ability to do any detox services. But this is somebody who typically is a family or has quite a bit of relationships on the line, in terms of needing to change, because, you know, people are really scared. People are really worried about what's next if we're not able to help. And ultimately, you know, this is somebody who believes in the gospel and who believes that there is freedom through Christ's grace. Want to introduce you to the team. We couldn't all be on today, but, you know, we were really lucky to get Matt, who's the clinical director. You see over here, Dr. Barta, who developed Tinsel, and myself. But Matt talked about this in terms of assembling the right team. And so for us, it was really important to have, you know, the right person in the right seat. And so if you look down at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see Tom Ryan. So Tom Ryan wrote a book. He actually comes from Kansas City, Missouri, but he wrote a book called The Shame No More, where he's actually able to talk about his journey and really being able to utilize his story to inspire hope and healing to those who are reading and are part of his ministry. Rick Long is if you know anything about somatic work or psychodramas, he's an amazing person that really is able to utilize movement and body position to help men relieve their trauma and a lot of that unresolved trauma issues. And then finally, you've got Anna Smith. So Anna Smith works with our partner support program or our loved ones program. And so she facilitates a 2-week virtual support group that's approximately 12 hours long that really helps those that have been impacted by this disease, by this disorder, to really help understand what betrayal trauma looks like. What do I do with my anger? How do I build hope? And how do I start to trust again? And she comes to us locally here, but she is a professor at Denver Seminary. She's a certified sex addiction therapist, and her sole focus has really been around partners and partner healing. So we're very lucky with the team that we have. Matt, would you talk a little bit about the schedule?
So this is kind of a snapshot of the schedule. this isn't it, it's set in stone here, but if you look at the different modules, basically the narrative of the treatment that we are building over this 2 weeks is, what does God have to say about who you are, right? How has he designed your nervous system? What is the traumas, and what is God's response to the traumas in your life? What needs have been developed out of those traumas that have gone unmet, that we're trying to get met in these sexual behaviors, right? And how has this fractured our relationships, our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with God, our relationship with our loved ones, our kids, our wives, right? And how has this progressed over time? And we're going to teach them about their nervous system. We're going to teach them about neurobiology. We're going to teach them about how to address and contain the behaviors in a way that is more successful once you address the trauma and the nervous system. And then we're going to bring them into the second week of the program, which isn't here on this slide, where we're going to talk about relational renewal with your spouse, your wife, your kids, a relational renewal in your relationship with God. What does it look like to have a God that's not disappointed in you, but is rather running towards you as he sees you from a long way off? And to have that partner in your support in your addiction, rather than this disappointed father figure that we've created, right? So relational renewal. And then the second half of that second week of the program is, how do we develop a strong recovery program of our own? How do we find therapists, find groups, develop practices for ongoing care and recovery moving forward? So it's a lot packed into 2 weeks, but we're very proud of the work that we're able to do consistently in those 2 weeks, with guys staying in the work all day, every day, not going back to their job, not going back to the house and the kids, are not getting onto their phone, because there no phones, no computers out here. So the amazing work that can be done when guys are staying in that emotional space for 2 solid weeks, I mean, it's really profound. So we also have this continuing care program for guys as they leave our program, that they can stay connected to us through online coaching. So we're offering Zoom groups for guys to get together for peer support that are moderated by members of the staff, to continue to do psychoed and peer support together moving forward. So the goals of those groups are to keep guys engaged in their recovery, keep guys engaged with the community of men that they've developed in their cohort while they're in the program. And we see so much success with those groups, and they're always full, and guys tend to really get a lot out of them. So we're really proud that we can stay in touch with guys after they leave.
Additionally, and one of the reasons why we're so excited to be talking with Jay and with this community, is we firmly believe that we do a great job virtually supporting the men, but ultimately the community that they're going to go back to needs to be in person. So for anybody who's watching this recording after the fact, we'd love to continue to expand our network in terms of being able to connect guys as they're leaving our program. We get guys from all over the country and even parts of the world. We've had guys from France, from Portugal. And so really being able to connect them with doing that warm handoff where they're calling the person before they leave, and really getting to know what to expect. Additionally, it's not just all education and trauma work. We want to be able to get the guys out, get them moving. And there's really, for any of you that haven't been to Colorado, there's an experience that I've had being next to the Rocky Mountains and just being, in awe of God's beauty and grace and just what he provides. And the guys have had such a spiritual experience on some of these mountaintops. So they do a daily hike that we start for our lowlanders, guys from Florida, guys from Texas, we start them off real light with like, a 1 mile hike. But then we work them up into more rigorous terrain as things go. And ultimately, just to kind of recap it, our program is 14 days in length. We do the cohort model with Boulder Recovery. It is in person, so everybody flies into DIA, Denver International Airport, and then that's where we start our COVID testing to ensure that the cohort and the milieu is safe. At that particular point, once everybody's cleared, we can start the work. The cost of the program is $14,500. We are able to work providing a super bill for guys that want to utilize insurance. But we do have a very honest conversation with them in terms of like, unfortunately, the insurance world isn't necessarily seeing the same urgency that we're seeing. And oftentimes that reflects in the reimbursement rates. So not to expect a full reimbursement for their stay with us. The other thing is the partner support program is also included, and that's done virtually with Anna Smith, and she does a phenomenal job in being able to really explain from a non-shaming approach of the partner's experience.
Yeah, and I want to say too that it's really important for us to be accessible as a program. So we do work with people around this cost, around this price point, and we want to make sure that people who need to get these kinds of trauma-based services that are really struggling with these childhood wounds around their addiction and need traction desperately, that we can work with them. So we do work with churches. We work with sponsorships and what's the word I'm looking for? Scholarship programs or counseling service budgets with churches. We do medical lending work as well. So we want to make sure that people understand that call us up and we want to work with you around that number if it's just not something that you're able to do.
Right. But that's all we have. So
yeah.
I'll stop sharing, but if you guys have any questions.
I'm going to unmute myself. And as usual, guys, if you want to go through the chat function at the bottom of the page, you can do that and just write your question. Or if you want to wave your hands and I can see you, I'll recognize you. I just want to say, just clear up a couple of things in terms of our connection. We met at last weekend. Actually, we were all in San Antonio at the Sexual Integrity Leadership Summit, which is a gathering of people that all work in this field. Some are pastors, some are ministry leaders, some are therapists, some run programs like Matt and Ed do. But we were able to connect. And actually, when I came back, I shared meeting them. And someone told me that one of our guys from Jacksonville had just returned a while back from one of your programs and is now ensconced in the recovering community here in Jacksonville, which is, of course, what we want to see on an ongoing basis. But it's a great organization because it connects everybody. It's a real sense of leveling in this whole community that's gathering throughout the nation from time to time to share resources, ideas, movements, perspectives on this, because it's a fairly new, only last quarter of a century has the whole psychological field and the healing field come to terms with this whole sex addiction, sexual brokenness, trauma model of healing. And so we're grateful for both Boulder Recovery and for Begin Again Institute for what they're doing. So again, feel free to ask a question on the chat function. I've got a couple, and you covered a lot of them. You mentioned a couple of things that might need a little bit more explanation. Can you explain brain spotting and what that is?
Sure. So brain spotting is an empirically validated trauma treatment that allows people to access traumatic memories through eye position. So depending on where in this space the trauma occurred for them and where they were looking at the time, we've discovered, and by we, I mean the scientific community has discovered, that you can access in a powerful way those traumatic memories through the eye position that you had during that trauma. So it's very similar to EMDR. It's a little bit quicker, so it's perfect for our use for that 2-week period, so we can get into those trauma memories. And what it basically allows you to do is to bring up that memory in a safe, supported space, engage your nervous system and all of the sights, sounds, and sensations of that memory, and kind of relive it and reprocess it in a safe way with a more beneficial emotional outcome, which is a 30,000-foot way of talking about how someone heals from trauma.
Thank you. So as you see people come in who are facing trauma, and I'm sure you see people coming in from lots of perspectives, and sometimes people ask, why should I see a therapist regarding this? And you mentioned the resistance sometimes in the church for people, because sometimes people have a little bit of a jaundiced view of psychology. They think it's maybe not biblical, depending on what tradition they come from. But in terms of the obstacles, what are the obstacles that you see in people who come in to actually face and come to terms with their own trauma?
Well, I think for Christian men, there's that initial obstacle, right? That well, God should be able to heal this, right? God can do miracles, and I've been praying for 5 years. I've been praying for 10 years that God would remove this addiction, and He just hasn't, right? So there's this initial barrier that I am suspicious of therapy and clinical work too. I've tried the prayer thing. I've tried pastoral support. I've tried, coming at it from that, just get disciplined and be rigorous about it. Those are the primary barriers, I think, at first to getting into those more clinical treatment. But like I said, if you look in Luke chapter 4, Jesus says to the people in Nazareth, He says, I've come to open the eyes of the blind, to set the captive free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And Jay, I see therapy as all woven into that, to open the eyes of the blind, to bring healing and to bring freedom to people held captive in their trauma and the wounds of the past. And that's not in conflict with the message of the gospel. That is in concert with the message of the gospel. So getting in with Christian guys and explaining that and putting that out there and saying, is it possible that the helicopter that you've been, or the salvation that you've been looking for from this addiction could be the helicopter, it could be the boat, it could be whatever, there's that old metaphor of guys waiting to be saved from the flood, and that God sends a helicopter, God sends a boat, and they're like, no, I'm waiting for God to save me. And it's like, hey man, I sent the boat, I sent the helicopter, right? And so therapy can be that boat, can be that helicopter. And I don't know if that totally answers your question,
The other thing that I would say, just real quick, is I think a lot of our, as men, we're raised to see trauma as being something that other people experience. Military veterans, they experience trauma. Police officers, first responders, they experience trauma. And a lot of our men don't understand that both we see trauma as both the bad and also not enough good. And so we term those both vacancy and violation wounds. And a lot of our men, they start to realize, and not out of judgment, that my parents oftentimes did the best that they could with what they have. And sometimes it just wasn't it wasn't enough, and to be able to go back and reparent themselves to get what they need.
Yeah, I'll just say from my case, my own father was a very good father in many ways, no abuse, but there was some, I think the word you use is vacancy, or sometimes neglect is the word, absent, not present physically, but not emotionally, spiritually, relationally. Right. So I think there was a certain wound there. And I think another thing about therapy, and you may want to reflect on this, is that my therapist here told me that every lust story, every sexual addiction story is unique because we all have our individual stories. So we can go learn all about the principles, but what we have to do is to apply those to our own individual trauma. And that's why we need this individual attention. So we have to go from the general to the particular to find out where is God in our story and where is he leading us through this healing into a better story, into a healing story. We all know Jay Stringer's book, Unwanted. He talks about the brokenness, revealing the path ahead. And that's where this becomes very exciting because we see that God is at work in this whole process. So again, if we're coming in the middle of this, just to refresh you, we're talking with Matt Wenger and Ed Tilton of the Begin Again Institute and Boulder Recovery in Colorado. And maybe you can just give us a couple things. Tell us where the gatherings are held when you're not outside in the beautiful Rockies, and also your contact information in terms of website and so on, so that people can find out more information.
Sure.
Matt, you want to go first?
Sure. So we're located in Boulder, Colorado. Both programs are here in Boulder. We have a beautiful house here where the guys are able to stay and then drive into a therapy office after the hikes in the morning. If you want to get in contact with the program and apply and just learn more about it, both of our websites are available. There's beginagagininstitute.com and boulderrecovery.com. And make sure you spell Boulder Recovery like the town, like with the U, boulderrecovery.com. So
yeah, all of that is on the chat, and we'll include it with the video of the Zoom call here when we send it out to you all in a day. So you'll have all of that information with you, so that you can be in touch with them as you like.
Yeah.
So you talked about when this is needed in someone's life, and generally speaking, what we see is that it's really good at the beginning when there's a lot of pain, a lot of discovery going on, things are out of control. And I use the analogy of when I go to my physician for the antibiotic when I'm sick. Usually at the beginning, you take 2 pills the first day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the analogy here, is you go after it very strongly in the beginning. That's the best way. When I went through discovery back in 1993, I went to a 2-week inpatient program in someplace here in Florida, which no longer exists, but it gave me that real strong beginning to recovery. And so I would just encourage any of you out there who are considering this, either watching it or present here today, that if you're stuck or you're in those initial periods, this investment, and it is an investment, but most things in life are that really work involve some sort of a financial investment, a house, cars, our kids' college education, all these things involve investment. If we make an investment in our own recovery in terms of time and resources, it does pay off. And the whole thing is to break this spell that we've been under, because in addiction, we are under this lifelong spell, and like we don't know that we're under it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we come into these kinds of gatherings that these guys are offering, we begin to all of a sudden realize, oh, now I understand a little bit of what's going on. Now I understand I can live a different life. And that gives great momentum as we come back into our own communities, and begin to realize that this is a lifelong change in how we've been operating. Anything you guys want to say about that?
well, we kind of you're exactly right. So we kind of specialize in like 3 different types of guys, like guys that have just been discovered and just like, I need help. I need to get this blazing, wildfire kind of under control, right? So a 1 week or 2 weeks or a month out from discovery. We also work with guys really well that are not finding traction in their recovery. They're relapsing a lot. They're in these relapse patterns once a week, maybe once a month. They just can't seem to get on track. And then the third guy that we work really well with is guys that have been sober for a long time, but are not experiencing the fruits of recovery. So they're still dealing with the emotional aftermath, or the emotional damage of their addictive behavior. So they're sober technically, they're white knuckling it through, but they're dealing with anger and rage and depression and all of these other issues that are flowing from, because they're not addressing the deep underlying needs that they were trying to get met in their addiction. So those are kind of the three. So we see guys that were discovered last week, or they've been sober a year and they just can't get over their rage, and they don't understand where that's coming from. And we get to enter into this whole different discussion about what does emotional sobriety look like for you. So those are the three types of guys that we do really, really good work with.
And so if you were approaching those guys, and we all know them, if we're in 12-step recovery for years, we know half the room is filled with guys who either can't stay physically sober, or there's just this kind of, as you say, the white knuckling. Many are not engaging with their wives. They do not have sexual relationships with their wives. We're beyond mutually agreed abstinence.
Yeah.
There just isn't any. And how would you approach them to say, you know, here's something that you really ought to consider investing your time, your money, your focus on, that might really help you?
Yeah, I tend to talk to guys, around this issue, and they'll say things like, "Well, I don't want to get into this deep emotional stuff because I won't be able to function." And my response is, "You're not really functioning. Is this what you call functioning? Like this turmoil of your life, is that functioning? Well, I don't really want to come out of the game." And you're not really in the game. You're not emotionally present. You're not emotionally present to yourself and to your kids and to your wife. Or, "Oh, I don't want to get super emotional because I'll lose control." Say, is this what control looks like for you? Is your life really under control? Have you really done the work? Like, that the behavior is bad and you've clamped down on the behavior, but have you done the work around the wounding and the trauma and the emotions that are attached to it? Are you allowed to be sad? Do you allow yourself to feel grief? Do you allow yourself to feel through your emotions rather than try to adjust them through outside sources, right? And are you willing to make an investment, not just in your health, but the health of your marriage and the health of your kids? Because when we talk about generational trauma, these guys know this stuff. Their fathers were alcoholics, or their fathers were war veterans, or whatever else. And say, hey, this generational trauma can stop with you if you want it to, if you will get vulnerable and get authentic. You can make a change, not just in your life, but in maybe not the world, but certainly your world can be changed.
The other thing that I would say, and I shared it in the Eventbrite, but it's I shared it in the chat. It's an Eventbrite that actually is going to be happening on Wednesday, 10 a.m. to noon Mountain Standard Time, where we're actually assembling the whole team to have a panel discussion. So the title of the presentation is called a faithful journey from discovery to recovery, but it really helps to break down our perspective from the discovery to the men's recovery, really like why we do what we do and how we help the men. And so it's a free event. Share it with your communities, share it with guys and we all know the guy where we're like, Tom rages a lot. Like, Tom could probably use to just like view this. The way in which we set it up is you can add whatever name you want, so that we wanted to make sure that there was a maximum anonymity, so that guys and their wives, whoever, can really just listen and see if anything resonates. Like Matt said, we're really just working to give freedom to guys that are really being confined by this addiction.
Well, we want to thank you guys. You have been a tremendous addition to our Zoom editions here, teachings, and we want to stay in touch with you. We want to make sure that we continue to partner with you and hopefully encourage people to go to your events and be part of what you offer through recovery. So, and if you wouldn't mind, if you sending that information to me through an email, it might be a little bit easier to me, because once I turn the recording off, it might be hard to recover the chat. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll include that in the Zoom recording as we send it out. So this wraps up our series. I believe we've done another 9 spring Zoom teachings for all of you, which are all going to be on our website, livingwithoutlust.com. They're being added to the website and to our YouTube channel. We're going to be breaking this part of our ministry for the summer. We will do it again in the fall. So if you have suggestions in terms of people that you'd like to have come and speak, we'd be totally open to considering all of that, whether they be ministry leaders, pastors, anybody who has a story to tell or something to offer to our recovering community here in Jacksonville. So again, Matt and Ed, thank you so much. And I look forward to being in touch with you.
Thanks so much, Jay.
All right. Have a great weekend, everybody.
You too.